Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The nurse freed from mandatory quarantine in New Jersey says she won't obey a new confinement order in Maine. Casey Hickox had been forced to live inside a tent at a Newark hospital after returning from West Africa, despite testing negative for Ebola. On Monday, Hickox was released to her home in Maine, where she now faces a 21-day home confinement rule. Hickox's attorney says she'll follow the federal guidelines requiring constant self-monitoring and a checkup with the local health authority. She remains asymptomatic, as she has been from the beginning. In his first comments on the state quarantine rules, President Obama said medical workers traveling to West Africa deserve support.
We can make sure that when they come back, they are being monitored in a prudent fashion, but we want to make sure that we understand that they are doing God's work over there, and they're doing that to keep us safe. And I want to make sure that every policy we put in place is supportive of their efforts, because if they are successful, then we're not going to have to worry about Ebola here at home.
Also Tuesday, the second nurse who contracted Ebola at Dallas Presbyterian earlier this month has been released from an Atlanta hospital. Amber Vinson had been declared virus-free Friday after being hospitalized 2 weeks ago. President Obama will meet with healthcare workers who've returned from West Africa at the White House today. Iraqi Kurdish forces have arrived in Turkey on their way to fight Islamic State militants in neighboring Syria. The Turkish government's opening its borders to the Iraqi Peshmerga to help break the ISIS siege of the town of Kobani. The United Nations has issued a new appeal for countries to take in refugees from Syria's 3-year civil war. The conflict has displaced nearly 3.5 million people, most of them to Turkey and Jordan. At a conference in Berlin, UN Refugee Chief Antonio Guterres says the plight of Syrian refugees is a global responsibility.
We ask the neighboring countries to keep their borders open, but we ask all countries in the world to keep their borders open to Syrian refugees. This is not only a responsibility of the countries of the region, this is a responsibility of the whole of the international community.
A new report says relations between President Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are at an all-time low. Speaking to The Atlantic magazine, anonymous White House officials say they have red-hot anger at Netanyahu for continuing to expand West Bank settlements and seeking to undermine an Iran nuclear deal. Netanyahu's reportedly preparing to bypass Obama and appeal directly to Congress if an Iranian nuclear deal is reached. One senior administration official called Netanyahu a chicken, followed by an expletive, saying, quote, he won't do anything to reach an accommodation with the Palestinians or with the Sunni Arab states. The only thing he's interested in is protecting himself from political defeat, unquote. Despite the heated rhetoric, the Obama administration's repeatedly backed the Israeli government, supporting the assault on Gaza, opposing a Palestinian statehood bid, and vetoing a UN Security Council resolution declaring Israeli settlements illegal. The report suggests diplomatic cover could vanish when the Palestinian Authority seeks full recognition for Palestine at the United Nations next year. There are conflicting reports out of Ferguson, Missouri on the fate of embattled police chief Tom Jackson. Unnamed government officials told CNN Jackson's expected to step down as part of efforts to reform the police department following the killing of the unarmed black teenager Michael Brown August 9th. But Chief Jackson and the city's mayor say the reports are false. We'll have more from Ferguson after headlines. A friend of Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has been convicted of lying to investigators about attempts to dispose of Tsarnaev's belongings. On Tuesday, a jury found Robel Philippos guilty of making false statements about his visit to Tsarnaev's dorm room 3 days after the attack. Philippos has maintained he was too intoxicated on marijuana to have a clear memory of the encounter. Outside the courtroom, a defense attorney vowed to appeal the verdict.
We will be filing post-conviction motions to vacate the guilty finding. We believe there are serious legal issues relative to the materiality of just being there, not having to do anything with the backpack or firework.
I don't believe that Robel Philippos has ever been more angry at a person than he is angry at Johar Tsarnaev. When Robel found out that Johar Tsarnaev did what he did in this case, he was absolutely mortified. It was an unbelievable feeling of shock and betrayal that somebody that he knew could commit such atrocious, horrible acts.
Attorneys Susan Church and Durej Demisi, the Seattle Times newspaper, is criticizing the FBI for creating a fake page under the paper's name in order to monitor a suspect accused of making bomb threats. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has revealed the FBI sent the suspect a link to a fabricated Seattle Times news story during an investigation. Once the suspect clicked on the link, authorities were able to monitor his computer. The FBI says the technique helped subvert a potential threat on a local school, leading to the suspect's arrest. But Seattle Times editor Kathy Best said, quote, "The FBI's actions taken without our knowledge traded on our reputation and put it at peril." In a related case involving the FBI, lawyers for a group of defendants accused of illegal online gambling have asked a court to dismiss evidence collected by FBI agents. The FBI apparently shut off Internet access at a Las Vegas hotel, then posed as repair technicians to collect evidence. The agents carried out the ruse against the recommendation of a prosecutor who said it could amount to an unreasonable search. The cases follow a New York woman suing the Drug Enforcement Administration for setting up a fake Facebook profile with her identity. Sandra Arquiette was arrested in 2010 on charges of involvement in drug trafficking. Arquiette says a DEA agent used images from her confiscated phone to set up a Facebook profile in her name without her consent. The agent then used the profile to contact other people of interest to investigators. The Justice Department says it's reviewing the case. Texas has carried out a new execution while another has been halted in Missouri. Miguel Paredes was killed in Texas based on a 2000 conviction for a triple murder. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court temporarily halted the execution of Mark Christen in order to hear his appeal. Christen was convicted of killing a mother and her 2 children in 1998. Both he and Paredes were convicted as teenagers. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, the U.S. is set for 35 executions this year, its lowest number since 31 executions 20 years ago. The United Nations has criticized Iran for the execution of a woman convicted of killing a man she had accused of rape. Rehana Jabari had claimed self-defense in her killing of an intelligence official who she said had raped her years earlier when she was a teenager. The case drew global attention and the attempted intervention of Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. But UN Human Rights Agency spokesperson Rupert Colville said Iranian officials ultimately bear responsibility for failing to stop the killing.
The Iranian authorities apparently did make attempts to prevent the execution, which was stayed at least twice in April and in September, in order to enable the 2 families to reach a settlement. However, it's the government's responsibility to prevent execution, especially when there is so much uncertainty about the events surrounding the killing and concerns over due process.
President Obama faces continued protests over his recent decision to delay executive action on immigration. Obama had promised a broad overhaul by the end of summer, including a potential new reprieve to slow his record-breaking deportations. But last month, he delayed any moves until after the upcoming midterm elections. While campaigning for Democrats in Wisconsin Tuesday, President Obama faced a disruption from the crowd.
Hold on a second. You young lady, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. Hold on a second. It's all right. It's all right. The young lady is expressing her concern about immigration and the fact that we don't have a comprehensive immigration bill. The problem is she should be protesting the Republicans who are blocking it in Congress. That's what she should be doing. That's what she should be doing, because I'm for it.
President Obama in Wisconsin yesterday. The massive explosion of an unmanned rocket in Virginia has raised fresh concerns about NASA's reliance on private contractors. The rocket, which used a Soviet-era engine, was made by Orbital Sciences, which has a $1.9 billion contract with NASA to make deliveries to the International Space Station. Since retiring its shuttle fleet in 2011, NASA has relied on private companies to supply the space station. Another orbital rocket engine reportedly suffered an explosion in Mississippi in May. The executive vice president of the company, Frank Culbertson, has warned the public that the rocket, which exploded Tuesday, quote, had a lot of hazardous equipment, hazardous materials on board. And protesters arrested in last month's demonstration in the heart of Wall Street are demanding a trial. More than 100 people were detained as part of the Flood Wall Street action targeting the financial sector's role in the extractive industries fueling global warming. As the cases were brought to court this week, a group among those arrested dismissed a prosecution offer to dismiss the charges after 6 months. Instead, the protesters said they want their case to go to trial so they can mount a necessity defense, arguing their actions were justified by how the financial industry worsens the climate change that threatens the planet. Flood Wall Street defendant John Tarleton explained the rationale Tuesday.
12 of us have pled not guilty to these charges of disorderly conduct. We want to take the case to trial and argue a necessity defense that the harm being caused by Wall Street in financing all sorts of extreme energy projects in this country and around the world is so much greater than any harm that was done by a traffic jam on Broadway. And we feel that that we have to continue to push this point that Wall Street and capitalism in general cannot solve the climate crisis because they are central to the problem.
The necessity defense had been the plan of 2 climate activists set to go on trial in Massachusetts last month for blocking a coal shipment. But the case was resolved after the prosecutor all but adopted their reasoning and dropped the charges. He then joined them in the People's Climate March. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.